Every course arrives precisely timed. Every napkin is folded exactly the same way it has been folded for decades. Every tradition, once established, becomes genuinely non negotiable, regardless of whether the people actually gathered around the table still want it, or simply continue attending because they do not want to disappoint the person who built it. This specific kind of hosting, meticulous, controlled, exhausting to maintain, is rarely actually about genuine hospitality. Carl Jung's understanding of the persona offers a precise explanation for why the perfect gathering so often has considerably less to do with the guests and considerably more to do with the host's own quiet fear underneath it. Jung believed that a persona built around flawless presentation often develops in direct response to a genuine, internalized belief that being valued requires being impressive, that falling short of a specific, exacting standard would somehow reveal something genuinely inadequate underneath. This persona frequently forms in areas where a person has spent real, considerable time proving their own competence, a career built on precision and presentation, an early environment where mistakes carried genuine, disproportionate consequence, and it does not remain confined to that original context. It extends outward, quietly organizing entirely unrelated areas of life, including something as ordinary as hosting a family holiday, around the same exacting, unforgiving standard. This explains why the actual underlying anxiety driving perfect hosting is rarely about the food or the table setting themselves. It is about a considerably larger, quieter fear that imperfection would somehow prove the host genuinely unworthy, and every precisely folded napkin functions as a small, repeated defense against this exact underlying fear, regardless of whether the actual guests gathered around the table have ever once cared about napkins at all. Here is what makes this understanding genuinely useful rather than simply an explanation for an exhausting hosting style. This specific persona, however impressive its actual results, tends to produce a genuine quiet cost that often goes unnoticed for considerable time, since guests experiencing rigid, exacting tradition frequently attend out of genuine obligation and genuine care for the host's feelings, rather than out of genuine, spontaneous enjoyment of the specific event itself. The actual felt difference between obligation and genuine enjoyment is often considerably harder for the host to notice than for the guests actually experiencing it, since a guest's polite, dutiful participation and a guest's genuine, spontaneous delight can look remarkably similar from across a beautifully set table. Here is what actually helps in working with this pattern directly. It helps to ask the people you actually host directly and honestly what would genuinely make the gathering something they look forward to, rather than continuing to assume that flawless, controlled tradition is automatically what everyone actually wants, since the real, honest answer often reveals a considerably simpler, considerably less effortful version of togetherness than the host has been quietly assuming was required all along. That is a second thing worth practicing directly. It helps to deliberately release control over one small, previously non negotiable element, a single dish rather than an entire elaborate meal, a considerably more relaxed format rather than a precisely timed schedule, and to actually observe what happens, since this small, deliberate experiment often reveals real felt evidence that genuine connection does not actually require the flawless execution the underlying fear has not it. There is a third, genuinely important piece worth understanding. Recognizing this pattern does not mean genuine care and genuine effort in hosting are themselves the problem. Real thoughtfulness remains a real, valuable gift. The actual issue is narrower, specifically the rigid, unforgiving demand for flawless perfection, which very often signals a persona protecting an old underlying fear rather than reflecting genuine, healthy generosity toward the people actually being hosted. If you recognize this specific pattern of controlled, exacting hosting in your own life, hear this clearly. This was never simple thoughtfulness, taken slightly too far. According to Jung's understanding, it very often reflects a persona built around an old, genuine fear of being valued only through flawless performance, and this deserves honest, patient examination rather than continued exhausting maintenance. Think honestly about the last gathering you hosted and consider whether the actual rigid standards you maintained reflected what your guests genuinely wanted or what an old internal fear insisted you needed to provide in order to remain genuinely valuable. Right below the single word for the specific element of hosting you find hardest to release control over, naming it honestly and testing in a genuinely low stakes gathering. What actually happens when you deliberately let it go is the real and practical way you begin discovering whether connection ever actually required the flawless performance you have been providing all along. There is a final piece worth naming, since it offers real, practical hope beyond simply managing the anxiety day to day. Many people who genuinely do this work, releasing rigid control one small piece at a time, discover that the resulting gatherings become considerably more enjoyable, not only for guests who had been quietly attending out of obligation, but for the host as well, since maintaining flawless perfection is itself genuinely exhausting, and releasing it frees real energy that can then actually be spent enjoying the people gathered rather than managing every visible detail of the room. Because being unable to host a gathering without making it absolutely perfect was never, according to Carl Jung's understanding, simple thoughtfulness or admirable attention to detail. It was very often a persona built around an old, genuine fear of inadequacy, and learning to release it, one small element at a time, was always the real, practical path toward the genuine, relaxed connection that flawless execution was never actually capable of providing.